When I came home and saw what had happened, I couldn't help but scream. All the furniture is gone, even the expensive bed. I usually have a good sense of people's true nature, don't I? My blood boiled when I saw my mother-in-law, Barbara, smiling as she said, "Barbara, did you do this?" "Yes, I had it all removed. I wanted to use it in my house. I had no choice but to do this. I can't stand the fact that you, a useless wife, are living off my son in this fancy apartment. The only reason you live here is because of my son, so don't even think about disobeying me. I'm his mother. If you annoy me too much, I'll make him divorce you. Remember that." Hearing this, I turned to Barbara, who was smirking at me. My hands trembled with anger. "What have you done?" "What? This isn't my house, and the furniture wasn't mine either." "Divvy what?" "My name is Emily. I met my husband Daniel in a college tennis club. He always liked living in style, more than anyone else around us. Even when we were dating, he would surprise me with gifts, things I had casually mentioned wanting, even when it wasn't my birthday. "I just wanted to see you happy, Emily. That's why I got it for you," he would say with a smile. Seeing him like that made me love him even more. After we graduated, we got married. We were the first couple among our friends to have a wedding, and we had a big celebration with them. I was the happiest I had ever been. Daniel and I both had jobs, but after we got married, he asked me to quit. "As your husband, I want to provide for you, Emily. I want you to take care of our home. When I come back from work, I want you to be there to welcome me." Looking back, I think his thinking was a bit old-fashioned, but at the time, I didn't mind. At first, I actually liked the idea of being a full-time wife, so I left my job and focused on our home. I enjoyed cleaning and doing laundry while waiting for Daniel to return every day. But no matter how much I cleaned, our apartment wasn't that big, so I still had a lot of free time. We lived in a small rental apartment. Daniel, who loved luxury, wasn't thrilled about it. But I told him that if he was going to be the only one working, we shouldn't spend too much money, so we chose to stay in our current apartment. Daniel always wore expensive clothes and watches, so I knew this place felt small to him. But to me, it was special because it was our first home together. One evening, Daniel came home as usual, and we were having dinner when he suddenly showed me an ad for an apartment. It was a luxurious place in a fancy neighborhood. The rent was nearly 10 times what we were paying now. I had to admit, the pictures looked amazing. But if we moved there, we wouldn't have enough money left for simple things, like this dinner we were eating. "This place is perfect. Isn't our apartment too small? Let's move," Daniel said. "I understand, but the rent is way too high. I actually like our apartment," I replied. "This place might be fine for storage, but it's not good enough for living," he insisted. "Don't worry about money. Just leave that to me." Our apartment might have been small, but it was still much bigger than a storage unit. Daniel and I had always had different views on money and spending. I had noticed this even when we were dating. Daniel begged me to agree. He really wanted to move. I felt like I had no choice, so I gave in. "Okay, if you really want to, then let's move. Thanks for living here for my sake until now, but I want to help with money too. Can I start working part-time?" I asked. "I can work shifts, so I'll still be home to cook dinner. Besides, I get bored just staying at home." "Okay," he said. Even though Daniel had a good salary, I doubted he could afford that rent all by himself. I had a feeling he had some other source of money, but I couldn't help but worry. Daniel immediately called the real estate agency and signed the contract right there in the middle of dinner. We ended the lease on our old apartment and moved into the new one at the end of the month. We brought everything from our previous place, yet there were still empty rooms. At first, I was nervous about the high rent, but I couldn't deny how spacious and comfortable the new apartment was. I felt excited about our future. A little later, my mother-in-law, Barbara, who lived far away, came to visit. I didn't like Barbara very much. Ever since our engagement, she had been cold toward me. Maybe she felt like I was taking her only son away from her. The day she visited, Barbara, who always nitpicked over small things, looked at me like I was her enemy. "You just moved into this fancy apartment, but your cleaning is awful. It's a mess. I know you've only lived in small places before, but I feel sorry for my son having to live like this," she said. "You're his wife, but you can't even keep a tidy home." Like a mother-in-law from a TV drama, she ran her fingers over the window frames, checking for dust, and peeked into the kitchen as if she owned the place. "Oh, by the way, I heard you started working part-time." Daniel must have told her. "I heard you're working long hours for just a few $100s. What's the point? It's a waste of time. I don't understand you at all. Why don't you go to a beauty salon and take care of yourself for your husband? You're so strange." Oh, so this was where Daniel got his spending habits, his parents. Of course, if I had extra money, I wouldn't mind going to a beauty salon or buying new clothes. But I didn't want to rely on Daniel's salary forever. I wanted to spend my own money on my own wants. I just smiled at Barbara's words since we clearly didn't see things the same way. When I told Daniel about it, he just laughed and brushed it off. He didn't take my side. Little by little, my frustration grew. Barbara started visiting all the time, constantly bragging about how much wealthier she was than us. At first, I found it amusing, especially since she never visited when we lived in our old apartment. But now that we had moved somewhere nicer, she suddenly came over all the time. When I told Barbara she had been visiting too often, her face turned red, and she snapped, "I'm Daniel's mother, and this is Daniel's apartment. There's nothing wrong with me being here. What's strange is that a poor girl like you is living here. I saw your neighbor earlier, and she was such a classy, elegant woman. Unlike you, of course. It was embarrassing. I felt so ashamed that someone like you was my son's wife. I wish he had married someone like her instead." Barbara kept lecturing me all evening. She only stopped when Daniel came home. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't have time to make dinner. Can you order something? I need to step outside for a bit." "What? No dinner? What have you been doing all day?" Daniel asked, frowning. "Mom came over because she was worried about you, Emily. You should be taking care of her. I'm staying out tonight." There was a cheap hotel nearby, and I considered staying there. Daniel saw how exhausted I looked, but he didn't care. Barbara had spent the entire day taking out her frustration on me, and I had nowhere to escape. Daniel didn't even acknowledge me. He just started chatting with Barbara about what food to order. That was when I ran out of the house. The next day, around noon, I returned home. I noticed that Daniel and Barbara's shoes were gone, meaning Barbara had finally left. I had braced myself for more of her insults, so I felt a bit relieved. But when I stepped into the bedroom, I couldn't believe my eyes. The bed was gone. At first, I thought a thief had stolen it, but nothing else was missing. No one would steal just one thing, no matter how expensive it was. I called Barbara to ask about the bed. She answered the phone casually. "Of that? I took it home with me." "What? That bed wasn't yours to take." "Relax. That bed was way too fancy for someone like you. I did you a favor by taking it. It was still in great condition, too. Anyway, I'll give you an old mattress I have. It's a little torn, but it suits you better." I could hear the smugness in her voice, and that was the last straw. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and replied, "Oh, I don't need it. You can throw that trash away yourself. And by the way, you took something that wasn't yours without permission. You didn't even bother to apologize." Barbara gasped. "Excuse me? How dare you talk to me like that? You've always been so arrogant. No wonder people don't like you." "Say whatever you want," I said calmly, "but I'll be getting my bed back soon. As I've told you before, everything in that apartment belongs to Daniel. As long as he doesn't say no, I can do whatever I want with it. That bed isn't ours, Barbara." For the first time, she went quiet. "What do you mean?" she asked suspiciously. I decided to tell her everything since she clearly had no idea. "I'm divorcing Daniel." Barbara laughed. "Oh, so you finally realized your place. Actually, all of my furniture has already been moved to my new place. The bed you took doesn't belong to us. It was rented from a furniture company." "Rented? You mean that luxurious bed wasn't even yours? You're unbelievable. You squeezed every last penny from Daniel, didn't you?" "No, Barbara. That was Daniel's idea. He loves impressing people. He picked that bed himself." I decided to tell her the truth about Daniel, things she had no clue about. Daniel always seemed wealthy in college, but his money came from borrowing from classmates and friends. He wasn't rich, he just spent money like he was. His parents had money, but once he graduated, he had to support himself. Right now, his salary is less than half of what he pays in rent. He still borrows money, and he secretly goes to casinos to gamble. Even so, he keeps spending, trying to look successful. He insisted on having a huge wedding just to impress people and rented a luxury bed to show off his expensive taste. Barbara was silent. For the first time, she had nothing to say. In the end, Daniel was just a man desperately trying to appear successful. The reason he wanted me to quit my job and stay home wasn't for any real reason. It was just to keep up appearances. Yesterday, you mentioned how wonderful our neighbor's wife was, Barbara. Well, that's exactly what Daniel said to me last month. He told me, you should be more like her. If you're not, it will make me look bad. He said it with that smile, just like when he used to give me gifts. It was all about looking good to others. That's when I showed Daniel the divorce papers. I've finally reached my breaking point. You've done a lot for me, Barbara. Just be prepared for the cost of that bed. I'll contact the rental company and they'll be reaching out to you soon. What? You're blaming me now? Come get it from my place right away. You owe me that much after all. I'm divorcing Daniel, so you're no longer his mother, Barbara. You're just a stranger to me now. I made it clear to her and let out a sigh of relief. Also, if you want to visit this apartment again, you'd better hurry. I've reported Daniel's debts to the real estate company and he might get evicted soon. If he does, I hope he can at least find a room with a bathroom. Barbara dropped the phone, speechless. Without waiting for a response, I hung up and blocked her number. Good, that was the last of the cleanup before the divorce. I left Daniel's apartment that day, and later I heard that he had been kicked out. He kept pretending everything was fine and insisting he'd soon pay off his debts, but he was evicted almost immediately. The company found him another apartment at a much lower price, but it was half the size of our first place. His friends had cut ties with him, and his debt was all he had left. As for the bed, when Barbara took it without permission, it got damaged. In the end, they had to buy it, but it cost less than $10,000, a sum they couldn't afford. Even Barbara, who had always favored her son, had grown distant from him since then. Now I could have a friendly chat with Barbara if I wanted to, but I never wanted to hear her voice again. Daniel would likely spend the rest of his life alone in a tiny apartment, abandoned by everyone. As for me, I was alone in a small apartment I had moved into, gently stroking the little cactus by the window. I didn't have much money since I only worked part-time, but I was planning to work more and save up. I didn't have to impress anyone anymore, and that was freeing. It didn't matter that my new place was small and simple. It was mine, and I could finally live for myself. I was glad I took the steps I did, despite all that happened. I decided to order some delivery for myself, a small luxury, but it felt like the kind of thing that brought real happiness. With a smile, I began browsing the menu, excited to treat myself.